Do you think that Tucker Carlson is an anti-Semite?
If he isn't, he's hiding his love for the Jews very carefully.
I feel like it's a trend of podcasters using their platforms, gaining more and more likes and shares and engagement and money from spreading hate against Jews.
Yeah, I think you've hit it on the head. It's about money, about power and influence. If you get a lot of clicks, you get more money. So one of the ways you get clicks is being ridiculously provocative, and it's a way in which you use conspiracy theories and you use really outlandish allegations and statements that cause people to say, I got to watch this. It's like watching a car wreck.
Hello and welcome to the Kraus Report. Today I'm hosting a very special guest, the U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. We had a fascinating conversation about anti-Semitism, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes, about pardoning Prime Minister Netanyahu, and about his relationship with President Trump. Ambassador Huckabee, thank you so much for joining the Kraus Report.
It is a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So first of all, Happy Hanukkah and Merry Christmas.
And Happy Hanukkah and Merry Christmas to you, too. It's a pleasure to be in the Holy Land during this Christmas and Hanukkah season. I get to celebrate all the great holidays of the world. In fact, for those who don't have one, I'll even celebrate Festivus with them, if anybody's a Jerry Seinfeld fan, and remember that.
So where are you going to celebrate Christmas?
We will be here in Jerusalem. This will be the first time that my wife and I will have experienced Christmas here. We normally always are at home, and this time we're still at home. We're just home in Jerusalem, but we have some of the members of our family coming to spend the time with us, so it's going to be very special. In all the many visits that I've been to Israel, I've never been here during Christmas time, and in part because I wanted to be home, and in part because historically, Christmas is very busy and packed during this time of year in Jerusalem. And I thought, yeah, I don't want to be there with the crowds. This time, it's not so crowded, at least for tourists. So we're very, very thrilled to be here.
Yeah, and you get all the access, right? You don't need to worry about getting stuck on the roads or
It's a little
something.
better when you're the ambassador. You do get a good parking place. So I will go ahead and confess that there are some advantages for sure.
Yeah, and before we start to talk about politics and US and Israel and Gaza, I wanted to ask you, was it always a dream of yours to be the ambassador to Israel?
I never thought about it. It was not something that I ever talked to the president about or asked him for. I was living a good life in the private sector, and I had kind of figured that my tenure in government service was long past, and I was busier than I've ever been, had some businesses that I owned, and hosting a daily television show as well as a weekly television show. So I had a lot going on. And just a few days after the election, President Trump called. And, he doesn't ask. You have to understand, President Trump, he simply tells you what you're going to do. So he
Really? So
calls,
what did he say to you?
he called me and he said, Mike, Donald Trump, you're going to be my ambassador to Israel. You're going to go to Israel. You're going to be great. You'll be great. And you're not going to be as great as your daughter. She's better. And that's what he always says. Every time I talk to him, he tells me that she's better than me. And you know what? I'd never disagree with him because he absolutely is right.
And your daughter is still in the political field. Did you get to ask her for an advice before you got the job? I mean, I guess you didn't say yes, as you just told me. I mean, you didn't have to say yes. He just told you this is your
Uh,
next job. But did you ask for her sort of like advice how to work with the president?
well, I've actually known him quite a bit longer than she has. I first got to know President Trump back maybe 2010, maybe even earlier, but I started my television show in New York for Fox News. And so I would have him on the show from time to time and first got to know him then. And then, of course, we were both candidates in the 2016 election. I was one of those 16 Republican candidates that he obliterated in the primary. As soon as I got out of the race, I endorsed him because I really felt like he was by far the best candidate that was remaining and never, ever regretted that. Always felt like that he was exactly the kind of transformational president that America needed. And I feel that way now more than ever.
How is your relationship with the president these days? Because I know he's very transparent. I know he's very much available. If you compare him to other presidents, how's it like with you?
We have a great relationship. I heard from him last week. It was about 5:30 in the morning when I got a call from him. Fortunately, 5:30 Israel time. Um,
So it's 10:30 p.m. in Washington D.C. or Miami.
right. And one of the things that I found about the president, you can send him a text or something maybe at what would be at 6 in the morning while I'm out taking my dogs out early in the morning. And I'm thinking, yeah, he won't see this for a while. And then a few minutes later, I'm getting a response. So you just have to know that the president is somebody who is up at all hours. I've never seen anyone like him at any age. I mean, the man is what, 78 years old. He has the stamina and strength of someone a third of his age. Now, that is one thing my daughter did tell me, is that nobody could keep up with him. And she would talk about the trips they would make overseas when they were doing foreign policy trips to Singapore or to, they made a clandestine trip on Christmas night to Iraq and flew there. She didn't even get to tell her husband or her family, her kids and in-laws that she was leaving to go to Iraq. She just said, "I have to go. I'll see you guys later." She left, got on the plane, Air Force One, and they flew to Iraq. But she said that one of the things they always were hoping was that he would go to sleep because they all wanted to go to sleep. And at all hours of the flight, he would call them up to his office on Air Force One and say, "Yeah, I wanted to visit with you about something." And all they wanted to do was just stretch out and crash.
Same thing
But
with the
that
journalists
is
on Air Force One, by the way. They want to rest. This is usually the time they get to rest, but no, no resting.
and then no, because he almost never sleeps. It's the most amazing thing.
So you're texting him while it's early in the morning in DC or Washington. He's texting you while it's late at night here before you go to sleep. We got a glimpse into your relationship during that period of time, those days while he was considering whether he should attack Iran or not.
Yeah, it was kind of bizarre because I sent him a message. It was a very personal message. I did not expect really to even hear back because I'm thinking he's really got a lot on his mind. But I wanted to share with him my thoughts. And my thoughts were not to give him advice. In fact, I said in the text, "You don't need my advice. I'm not going to give it to you because your instincts will be right. I will trust those. Just know that, we are recognizing that you have one of the toughest decisions that any president has had to make. I know you will uh, call upon God. I believe that you were spared for such a moment and you will make the right decision." I didn't know what his decision would be, but I felt like he needed to just hear the encouragement from the ambassador that he had put right in the middle of all of this. And I did have total confidence that whatever the decision that he would make would be the right one. So I didn't try to convince him or persuade him. In fact, I was very explicit saying, "I'm not trying to persuade you one way or the other." And within 5 minutes, I get this wonderful response back from him. And he says, "I really appreciate what you sent. I've read it over and over, and it really, really means a lot." 30 minutes later, I'm starting to get responses from friends all over the world. And they're saying, "Oh, wow, I saw what you sent to President Trump." And I'm thinking, how did you see what I sent to President Trump? Did somebody hack my account and leak it? No, he had posted it on his social media accounts and it went viral from there. But it was simply a personal message from me to the president. And apparently he appreciated it and shared it with the world.
On the night of the attack, did you know that the US is about to attack before it
Some
happened?
things I cannot disclose. I did not know at that particular time.
Okay.
I was not aware what his decision would be. Quite frankly, and to be very honest, I hope that he would engage because I felt like that the U.S. involvement could bring a much faster end to the conflict. And I thought it was also an important message to say that America will stand by its allies and that it will stand against its adversaries. And to this day, I believe that the most important thing that happened that night um, was not just the B 2s going in and bombing Fordo with weaponry that only the United States had. I thought what was really significant was that it sent a very important message first to our allies, and not just Israel, but to every ally we had in the world, that America will stand with you when it really counts. But the other message that he sent, which I thought was equally, if not more important, was a message to our adversaries, a message that was not just sent to Tehran, but was sent to Russia, to China, to North Korea, um, to any adversary that we might have or one day could have. And he said to them, um, if, if you want to take us on, just realize we can find you, we can get to you, we can deal with you, and you can't stop us. And I thought that the message that those B-2s delivered was far more than a bomb. It was an important statement of a superpower saying, we don't use our strength and power lightly. We don't use it all that often, but when we do, we mean business. And President Trump is a man who, when he says something, he means it. And he kept telling Iran, we can do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way. And he told him, you're not going to enrich uranium. You're not going to have a nuclear weapon. And I don't know if they just didn't believe him, but I think that Saturday night, they believed him.
But you did know before the Israeli attack, right? Because you tweeted that night.
You talked about the night that Israel first launched its attacks?
That Israel attacked, yeah, launched
Yeah,
the
I would
attack.
just say that there's some things I cannot disclose, what I knew and didn't know. It was all closely held. Um, but the thing that did happen was the most flawless execution of a military operational plan, maybe in all of human history. There's never been anything like it. And those of us who were watching it up close and personal, and we were sitting in our classified skiff through the whole opening stages of it. In fact, I spent the night in the embassy that night. Um, it just was one of those moments you realize you're sitting through something that is historic. No one would have ever imagined, including the Israelis, as good as they are, would never have imagined that 12 days of flying fighter jets that distance, having to be refueled on the way, would ever result in not a single pilot or airplane loss. I mean, it's uncanny. And I've talked to many people who are Air Force, uh, I guess, experts on what airframes like that can do, the F-35, the F-15, the X-16. And to a person, they all say the same thing, that it would have been very normal to lose a number of airplanes just due to the stress of that many flights, to mechanical failure. And the fact that there was not one mechanical failure, not one pilot that was lost or even had to eject and be rescued, was something for the history books. And I think that the overall operation will be studied in war colleges for generations to come as how to plan a very delicate operation and to carry it out with such precision that you take on a country 10 times your size and you bring them to their knees. I see it as an absolutely successful operation because, first of all, it stopped any development that Iran had at that moment of trying to enrich uranium or build a weapon. Um, I don't think any of us thought that Iran would just throw up their hands and say, oh, we'll never do that again. Because, frankly, they're too stubborn. They're too determined to destroy Israel and the United States. And I want to emphasize for 46 years, Iran has been saying death to Israel and death to America. I think a lot of Americans, maybe they were too young or not born yet to realize that this is a message that Iran has been saying since 1979. And when they continue to tell you, we're going to kill you, you might want to start believing them. And I know the president repeatedly said to them, you're not going to have a nuclear weapon. He wasn't saying that just for protecting Israel. He was saying it for protecting 340 million Americans. Because if Iran did have a nuclear weapon, they're crazy enough to use it. And there's no reason to think that they would build one and just sit on it. They didn't build ballistic missiles and sit on those. They haven't built short range rockets and sent them to Hezbollah, to Hamas, and to the Houthis and sat on those. This is a country that has determined and repeatedly declared that it would destroy Israel and then it would destroy the United States. That Israel was the appetizer, but that the U.S. was the entree.
Can you tell me a little bit about your relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu?
We have an excellent relationship. I mean, it is the nature of my job as U.S. ambassador to Israel. Israel is our closest partner. I like to say it this way. We have a lot of friends, we have a lot of allies, but America really only has one true partner. And by that, I mean, we have a relationship with Israel that is unlike any other. It's partly because we share so much in the world of technology. We share so much in the world of intelligence gathering. That intelligence often saves the lives of Israelis. It saves the lives of Americans in ways that neither population will ever fully appreciate. But it's because there is such an extraordinary seamless operation between both Israel and the United States. Sorry about the dog.
I want to see him.
I mean, I may bring him around in a moment because
You
if he starts
should.
barking, he doesn't usually want to quit.
Did you bring him with you from the U.S.?
Oh, I did. I have two little dogs, and they're both with me. One of them likes to bark a lot, and he is going. I can pause for just a moment and
Sure.
try to send him to another room.
Of course, of course,
hold
of
on.
course. Sure. Oh, he's so cute.
Okay, this is Gumbo, and
Dumbo. How
I'll
old
try
is
to
he?
hold him here until he starts barking, and maybe I can get him sent away.
Oh,
But
he's so cute.
well, I
Dumbo.
think so. He's a pretty cute little
How
dog,
old
and
is he?
he has a brother. He is 4 years old, and he's got a brother named Bandit, who is crawling in the room. But Bandit doesn't bark as much as Gumbo does.
So they have like the opposite names, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I'm going to let him go see if my wife can get him situated in a non-bark mode for a while. So,
He's so cute. So we spoke about Prime Minister Netanyahu.
yeah, I was going to say that the relationship that the U.S. has with Israel is just incredible, and therefore I see the prime minister. Usually a few times per week. Sometimes I can be at the prime minister's office till midnight or later, depending on the meeting and what's going on. We have an excellent relationship, but it's also fair to say that I've known the prime minister for probably 30 plus years in my many trips here over the years. So it was not something that when I got here that I had to get acquainted and have a handshake with him and say hi, let me introduce myself. And that was a plus. It was a plus for both our countries. But my job is to represent President Trump and the United States to the state of Israel. And it's a real privilege to be able to do that because I've had a long-standing relationship with Israel going back to 1973 when I made my first trip here. And before coming as ambassador, I'd been here over 100 times. So I feel very comfortable and at home here. And I know quite a bit of people in the Knesset. I know people throughout the Israeli government, as well as in the business community, people that I've gotten to know through the many trips and travels here.
One of the pictures that the Israelis would remember most from the past few months of you is you coming into the courtroom with a Bugs Bunny doll. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, as you know, President Trump had sent two very long social media posts in his support of the prime minister uh, getting this trial behind him. It's gone on for years, and it looks like it could go on forever. President Trump understands that sometimes your political enemies, if they can't defeat you at the ballot box, they try other means. And what they have attempted to do with President Trump is to keep him in the courtroom and tie him up not only in terms of his time, but his money, and make him spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal fees for charges that eventually get dropped or they get thrown out by an appeals court. He understands just how uh, frustrating it is to be a leader of a major country dealing with real crises like an active war and people having their lives threatened every day, and yet having to be stuck in a courtroom for hours upon hours. When he saw this was happening to Prime Minister Netanyahu, it was not that he was trying to dictate to the Israeli courts or telling what they should or shouldn't do, but he was acting as a friend. And he was saying, this is really not a great way to treat someone who's trying to lead a country in the middle of a war. So the president was very clear that, he was standing by the prime minister and was empathetic with what he was going through. My presence there was somewhat as a way of saying, on behalf of the president, I'm here to physically affirm what the president is saying 6,000 miles away.
Did you tell President Trump before you got there?
I think it was well known in Washington that that I would be going and just simply observing. And part of it was to be able to say, I wanted to see what really is going on in that trial. And so, I wasn't trying to so much take a position as I was representing the president, who had taken a very clear position, uh, to have a firsthand look, and of course, to be able to report back to the president what I was seeing and what he was sensing from being in DC, but also having gone through the same sorts of
This
things.
is the one part that I'm trying to understand better. If President Trump feels like there's a resemblance between what he went through and what Prime Minister Netanyahu is going through now.
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about that. Um, it's one thing if you're in an elected office. I've been in politics for a long time. You put your name on the ballot, you run for office, and the people make a decision. And if the people make a decision, it's generally sort of the practice that voters and the political apparatus says, okay, we respect what the voters have decided. But in the case of President Trump, what we saw was that there was a real effort of what we call in the US lawfare, which is a form of warfare, but it's using the courts and the law to try to take down your political opponent. So that if you can't beat him by getting more voters and more people to side with you in your position and vote for your guy, you just try to say, okay, uh, let's take the guy that the people selected and let's try to run him through the court system and not just take him down, but let's ruin his life and his family's life. And it really ought to be something incredibly serious to go after a political leader once elected and once in office, and especially at a time when there is so much crisis going on. That leader really needs to be able to operate without the distractions of having to sit through court cases and trials and testimony for several hours a day, several days a week. And when the president saw that happening to the prime minister, having been through that himself, I can't remember how many, I think it was like 93 different charges filed against President Trump over the course of 4 years. The thing they did not expect from President Trump was that he would never give up, that he would never roll over. It was never going to be enough pressure for him. I think they thought, well, if we just keep pushing these charges, we'll try him in North Carolina, we'll hit him in Florida, we'll hit him in Virginia, we'll hit him in New York, we'll hit him wherever we can, and we'll have so many things going on against him that he'll just throw up his hands and say, I'm done. That's it. I quit. They do not understand Donald Trump when they say that. This is not a man who is afraid of a fight. It is not a man who gives up easily. He didn't get where he is by being a quitter or by being somebody who can't take a punch. But what they also learned is he's not only a man who can take a punch, by golly, he is a person who can deliver a punch. And that's what a lot of people have never understood about him. He's the most resilient person I think I've ever known. Never seen anyone like him. And the pressure and the attacks roll right off of him. And they don't cause him to curl up in a fetal position, lay down on the floor, and say, I can't go to work today. This is too hard for me. It just makes him more determined.
I had Eric Trump on this podcast, and he spoke about how meaningful it was for him to sit next to his father, President Trump, on the bench of the courtroom. And he spoke about all of those indictments. But I do feel like there's something different, between mainly between the judicial system in the US and the judicial system in Israel. And I guess a lot about it. The main thing is that the judicial system in the US is political. And here in Israel, it's not. And this is why I feel like many Israelis don't necessarily understand why the US would like to intervene to state an opinion about that.
I think it's not so much just stating an opinion. It's observing from the distance and asking, is this really the time to put the elected prime minister through days and days and days and hours each day of testimony in a court when there might be some important things like getting hostages released, prosecuting a war against those who are holding those hostages, dealing with all the crises that go on because you had so many nations that were condemning Israel more than they were condemning Hamas. And why would you do this right now? Why wouldn't you push the pause button? If you think that these charges are this serious and this, uh, I guess, urgent to be prosecuted, would it not be better to at least say we're going to delay this until such time as the prime minister is not utterly consumed with leading a country and a military during a war?
Okay, and last question about that. How did you get the idea to bring the Bugs Bunny doll?
Well, as you know, one of the charges against him was that when his son, who is now in his 30s, when he was like 5 years old, somebody, a friend of the prime minister, gave the prime minister's son a little Bugs Bunny doll. And that was supposed to be one of the big forms of bribery. And I think most of us looked at that, whether we, like the prime minister or not, you look at that and say, seriously, that you're going to bribe a prime minister with a stuffed toy uh, of Bugs Bunny? I mean, it seems ludicrous and laughable. And I think people were scratching their heads and saying, tell me you have more than this. Tell me there's something more significant to put in a court case against the prime minister.
No, they do have
Yeah.
champagnes and cigars. By the way, it's not in the charges, the Bugs Bunny. They spoke about it in the courtroom. This is true, but it's not in the charges. And then did you tell the prime minister or someone from his office that you're going to come, that you're going to bring a doll with you?
I just let them know that I was going to come. The prime minister had told me in a meeting I'd had with him at some point, it had been weeks before, you ought to come and see this trial. And then after the president sent his messages out, I thought, well, might be a good idea to go see. So I did. Uh, and I'd certainly told his staff. I didn't have a conversation with him about it, but I had to let his staff know that I would be coming and just sitting in for a while. I wasn't the only ambassador who did that, by the way. I think I'm trying to remember. It seems like the Japanese ambassador had also gone to the trial prior to me. So it wasn't without precedent and it wasn't without any kind of reference point, but it apparently got a lot more attention than anybody else
A
showing
little
up
bit
at
of
the
press,
trial.
just a tiny bit of, some headlines. I have so many things that I'd like to talk to you about, but I feel like there's one thing that we must talk about and, have an in-depth conversation about, and that's anti-Semitism. Because,
Mm,
we just saw the horrible, horrible terror attack in
mm.
Sydney, Australia. And in the US, we see the rise of anti-Semitism. And I'd like to hear your point of view. What causes this? Is it post October 7th? Why is it getting bigger and bigger and louder now after the war is over? I want to hear your perspective on that.
Well, first of all, let's just be clear. The level of Jew hatred, and I tend to call it that rather than anti-Semitism, simply because anti-Semitism is to many people, especially younger people, it's maybe a nebulous term. They don't really understand. They don't know how to define it. But if you say that you just have an irrational hatred toward Jewish people, that's really what anti-Semitism is. And this Jew hatred is just that, it's irrational. If you ask, why is it that you would hate the Jewish people? What is it that they've done to you? Why would you wholesale hate them? There really isn't an answer to that because there isn't a reason. There's nothing substantive that you can say, the Jews were responsible for killing my dog, or the Jews let all the air out of my tires while it was parked in the driveway, or the Jews went into my bank account and took all my money. There's nothing that you can say that the Jews did to the average person sitting across the world. It makes no sense. I would suggest, and I know maybe I'm on a limb here, but it's not the first time I've said, I believe that Jew hatred is because there are people who hate God. And if you hate God, if you want to replace the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob with your own created God, if you want to worship the created instead of the creator, if you're such a climatist that you believe that we should worship the climate and serve the climate instead of having the climate serve us, as just one example, or if you believe that the Jews are really the representative of God because they're the ones who talk about him, they're the ones who really started talking about God from the beginning of creation, and they're the ones who 3,800 years ago were audacious enough to say, God spoke to Abraham. He gave us this land. He told us it would be ours. He told the world that those who would bless Israel would be blessed and those who cursed Israel would be cursed. He revealed himself through the prophets, through the judges, through the kings. He revealed himself through the law that was given through Moses on 2 tablets of stone at Mount Sinai. And this is a God who is always revealing himself in the linear version of history. It's not a God who just dropped a book down on us and said, you guys ought to read this. I got some real good rules here for you. It is a God who has interacted with human beings from the beginning of time. Well, if you reject the notion that there is a God and that God holds us responsible and accountable for our individual behavior, then rejecting those who represent him, who are in some ways the personification of what he has said and done, then it's the only thing that you can come to and say, yeah, if I hate God, I better hate all those people who think that they represent him and who claim to have a special relationship with him. Otherwise, none of this makes sense. It's insane. And it's the act of really what you almost would have to say are people who are criminally insane to hold a level of hatred and bigotry toward people that you can't even describe what the source is.
And how do you explain all of those podcasters that are just, filled with hate against Jews? I feel like it's a trend in the past few months. Tell me your thoughts about it. I want to hear your thoughts. I feel like it's a trend of podcasters using their platforms, gaining more and more likes and shares and engagement and money from spreading hate against Jews. What do you think
I
about it?
Yeah, I think you've hit it on the head. It's about money, about power and influence. If you get a lot of clicks, you get more money. And so one of the ways you get clicks is being ridiculously provocative. And it's a way in which you use conspiracy theories and you use really outlandish allegations and statements that cause people to say, I got to watch this. It's like watching a car wreck. You can't take what I'm watching.
Tucker
Yeah,
Carlson, Candace
yeah.
Owens, Nick Fuentes. Do you think that Tucker Carlson is an anti Semite?
If he isn't, he's hiding his love for the Jews very carefully. And look, I've known Tucker Carlson since 1991 because I think his first job out of college was working in Little Rock, my hometown, uh, for the Arkansas Democrat Gazette newspaper. And from there, he went on to TV. I worked with him in New York at Fox for 6.5 years. I've known Tucker for quite a while. This is not the Tucker Carlson that I knew. I mean, he's always had a strong opinion of himself. That's not abnormal for people in the media. Um, and for people who are very smart. And he's smart. He's not a dumb person. But when it comes to Israel, he's an ignorant person. And let me define the difference. Dumb is when no matter what information you have, your operating system does not work to process it properly, and you can never come to a good conclusion. Ignorance is when it's not your operating system that's at fault, but your data input is terribly messed up. And the result is that when you process information that you do not really have, you come to some very terrible conclusions. Now, what drives that with Tucker Carlson? I cannot point my finger and say Tucker Carlson is taking money from a foreign government and that's where it's coming from, or that he's getting money from people who may not represent a foreign government, but who are sympathetic to a foreign government, and they become sponsors of his show and investors in his enterprise, and so he's going to be favorable. I don't know that that's the case, but I do know that when I watched a pretty good section, if not most, if not all, of the interview that he did in Doha, with the high-level prime minister of Qatar, and he asked these softball questions, and he made some outrageous statements. For example, he talked about how Israel attacked the country of Qatar. And I'm thinking, no, they really didn't. They fired a missile at a terrorist. Didn't turn out as well as they had probably hoped. Wasn't their best moment. But they didn't attack the country. They didn't go after Qatari officials. They went after a Hamas terrorist. That's who their target was. And then to translate that into saying, oh, they violated the sovereignty of a country. And I'm thinking, by that standard, the United States probably is not a very favorable entity to Tucker Carlson, because I remember when we went after Osama bin Laden, and we did it right in the middle of Pakistan. And I don't know that we asked their permission. In fact, I know we didn't. But every American I know celebrated that the U.S. and SEAL Team 6 was able to take down Osama bin Laden. He had murdered 3,000 Americans, masterminded it, on 9/11. Most Americans have never really calculated the fact that what Israel experienced on October 7th, the murder and massacre and mutilation of 1,200 civilians, if that had happened in the United States, it would be the equivalent of 40,000 Americans dying in the space of a few hours. What would Americans do? I mean, I know what we did when 3,000 of us were murdered, and we changed everything we do in our country. I mean, from how we get on airplanes to going into a building to what our driver's license and passports look like, to pretty much the whole world, changing our security methods, moving into areas, creating government agencies expressly to deal with counterterrorism. We changed everything in the United States. Over 1,200, over 3,000 people. If that had been 40,000 people, what on earth do you think Americans would have done? And then they had captured and kidnapped and held hostage, beaten, raped, robbed, tortured, starved about 10,000 Americans and put them in tunnels underneath the earth. I just wonder how many Americans would say, well, let's don't overreact now. Let's don't overreact. Let's be very calm here. I guarantee you, as an American, there is no way that Americans would have ever given that message to its government to just relax, take a deep breath, calm down, and maybe eventually those who did this dastardly thing will give the hostages back.
And you've been saying that, and you do give interviews once in a while. Some of them are also going after you. This is how you feel, right? I mean, I saw Tucker Carlson is going after
Yeah.
your team, your people. He had an entire episode about Milstein and also about you, against you personally. He named you.
Yeah, he did.
What did he say exactly about you?
He said I had a brain virus, and that of all the people in the whole world that he despised, that he had more contempt and despised Christian Zionists more than anyone else on earth. And I'm thinking, wow, that puts me in a pretty, very unique category. If I'm despised more than a serial killer, despised more than a terrorist, a cannibal, I guess I'm worse than Jeffrey Dahmer to him. I don't know. But, I didn't lose any sleep over what he said, because it's free speech. He can say what he wants. But I'm not going to sit back and be silent when he says things like that Winston Churchill was the real villain in World War II and that Hitler really wasn't that bad, or that Vladimir Putin leads this magnificent country and the people in Russia are better off than they are in America. I mean, you just can't listen to that and remain silent. If you do, you're agreeing with it. I had a high school speech teacher that used to drill into me when I was 16 years old. And some of the kids in the class were saying, "Why do we even need to take speech?" And he said, "Because you need to know how to articulate what you stand for." And he would tell us over and over again, silence is agreement. If you hear something that is wrong, that is evil, that is hurtful to other people, and you say nothing, you are agreeing with it. And that still haunts me today. I cannot be silent when I hear things that are, first of all, untrue, blatantly ignorant. And then when those things are hurtful and create the atmosphere that cause people to think that they are justified, not only in their Jew hatred, but in their Jew murder. I'm not saying the government of Australia pulled the trigger on the 16 people who were murdered in Sydney. But when you help foster and create an atmosphere, you have some culpability in what that atmosphere leads to.
Yeah, and I think that it's really important to say that. Do you feel like people like Tucker Carlson, Nick, do they influence the president, President Trump? Because I saw him a few days ago at the Hanukkah lighting. It doesn't seem like, it hits him too hard. What do you think?
It's hard to say, but I don't see any evidence that Tucker is influencing President Trump. Let's go back to when President Trump sent the B 2 bombers. In the weeks leading up to that, Tucker Carlson repeatedly said that America had no business getting into that conflict. And if we did, we would have, I think his number was something like 20,000 Americans would die. We'd be in a war for the next 15 or 20 years. He made these outlandish claims of what would happen. Well, now the whole world knows that he wasn't just wrong, he was miserably wrong. I mean, in everything he said and the degree to which he said it. I know that if he thought he was influencing President Trump, he obviously was very mistaken because President Trump did what he did not because Tucker Carlson was in his ear. He did what he did because he did what he believed was right. I'm going to take you back to a conversation I had with President Trump in I guess it was 2018. And it was not long after he had announced that he was going to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Something that every president, Democrat and Republican, had been saying for decades. They all said it. They never did it. And even though members of Congress unanimously would vote to move the embassy, the president never actually executed that decision. And there would always be a reason that, well, the time isn't right. It could stir up a lot of trouble. Well, I happen to know my daughter was working at the White House at the time, and I knew from even public comments of others that every world leader had told the president, please don't move the embassy. It will be an incendiary moment that will just cause chaos and catastrophe, and it will blow up the Middle East. And so he was hearing from the Europeans, he was hearing from the people in the Western Hemisphere, he was hearing from Asia. More importantly, he was hearing this from his then Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State, the key people who should have helped him make this decision, and even people at the White House. I mean, not a lot, but there were some who were telling him, no, no, sir, don't do this. And he did it. And I happened to be in the White House a couple of weeks after this. I was actually there to see my daughter, but he heard I was there and he called me into the Oval Office and wanted to visit with me. So we were visiting. And I said, Mr. President, I got to ask you something. Everyone on the planet urged you to not move the embassy, but you did it anyway. Why? And he looked at me very simply and he said, because I said I would, and it's the right thing to do. And it was at that moment that I realized we have an unusual, but thank God, a decisive, true leader, somebody who makes executive decisions not by wringing his hands or taking a poll of his strongest critics. But his statement to me solidified one of the reasons that I am to this day such a strong supporter of the president. He said, I said I was going to do it, and it's the right thing to do. What more does one need? I thought it was just so powerful. He kept a promise that he made, and he believed it was the right thing to do, and he would not let a lot of outside influences keep him from doing what he believed was right. and what he had promised.
That's an interesting story about how he just heard that you were there, so he was letting you in the oval. By the way, there's also Candace Owens, you know? She's talking about the murder of Charlie Kirk while mentioning Israel.
Oh my gosh. But this is the same person who says that President Macron of France is married to a man, that Bridget Macron
Yeah.
is actually a
Yeah,
male.
yeah, yeah.
And I'm really glad. I mean, the Macrons are suing Candace Owens, as they should. That's a level of defamation and frankly insanity that I can't even begin to even describe. But the things that she says that um, Israel was behind the murder of Charlie Kirk. You know, I knew Charlie very well because when I left to come here, my daily television show, I turned over to Charlie Kirk. A lot of people don't even realize that. And I was in his studios in Arizona just before I came. And during one of the breaks, it was very interesting because Charlie turned to me and he said, "You know, there's only one job in government I would ever want, and that's to be ambassador to Israel." He said, "You're getting a job that would be the only thing I'd ever want to do." And we had a great conversation about that. You know, for
Did
people
you
to say
get to
he
meet
didn't,
him when he came to visit Israel?
I knew Charlie since he was like 17 or 18 years old. When he first started, he was still just, you know, a young guy getting Turning Point started. I knew some of his very early large donors who helped him launch Turning Point. I watched what happened with this incredible organization that he built. Uh, he was a force of nature. There were very few people I've ever seen like him who had the ability to articulate his message in the most hostile of environments, but to do it in such a winsome but yet effective way. And he was really a threat to the people who hate free speech, a threat to people who hated Jews, who hated Israel. And when I hear the Tucker Carlsons of the world get up and say at a public event in front of thousands, everybody knows that Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad agent. What I'm hearing as an old debater in high school and college, I'm hearing what I learned in rhetorical theory class. And that is that if you are wanting to move a crowd, you use certain rhetorical devices. They're weapons of propaganda. And you say things that you know you can't prove, but you don't say them in a declarative way. You don't say, Jeffrey Epstein was a member of the Mossad. You try to involve the audience into making them think that they believe it too. So you say, everybody knows. Well, what are you doing there? You're basically saying, well, if you don't know that, you're not real smart. And so people will nod their heads and say, oh, yeah, yeah, I knew that. They've never known that. They've never thought that before until he said that. And then they pretend that, oh, yeah, that's widely held knowledge. That is a very dangerous rhetorical device. It is the same thing that dictatorial people through the ages have used to sway crowds and to lead them to do horrible things.
I
And
feel
all
like
we got
what
to,
we see these
yeah,
days is the very old version of anti-Semitism. Like, it's
yeah.
from the old books of Jews control the world and Jews control money. And, Charlie Kirk was murdered. It was the Jews. How do you explain the rise of anti Semitism on the right? Because we've seen it on the left side. And now on the right side, there is sort of a new type of anti Semitism that is spread widely through social media. So this is the new version of it.
I think the same level of evil that causes that on the left is what causes it on the right. It's people who want to seem important, who want to get attention, who want to make money and to make money off their hate and find that there are a lot of gullible people that if they say outrageous things and keep saying them loud enough and long enough, there will be people who will foolishly believe them and follow them. I mean, isn't that the lesson of the Third Reich? Isn't that the lesson of the 1930s? That there were people that started out as being, decent, thoughtful, intellectual people, but because they heard a lie over and over and over, and they heard it with such volume, and they heard it from people who spoke with such authority, they they didn't want to be left out. They didn't want to be the only ones who didn't believe it. So they came to the place where they started saying, I guess that must be right because, boy, a lot of people are saying it. They're sure saying it loudly. That's why it is so dangerous. If this were being said timidly and being said very quietly, it wouldn't be as dangerous. But I would say to people who say, oh, the Jews are behind every bad thing. I mean, you got people who think the Jews sunk the Titanic, that they brought down the Hindenburg, that they kidnapped the Lindbergh baby. I mean, anything ever that happened in human history that went wrong, the Jews had to be behind it. And to that, I would say, you're really giving the Jews credit for something that's pretty extraordinary. They represent 0.01% of the population of the earth, 16 million Jews on the whole planet. And somehow, this tiny, almost minuscule minority of people, most of whom, half of them, live in one little piece of land the size of New Jersey, and the other half are spread out around the world, largely in America and New York, Miami, a few other places. But if you think about this tiny little population and you give them credit for having that level of influence and control, I would almost back up and say, if they're that good, maybe we ought to all follow them. And I'm being obviously sarcastic, but that's the point. It's irrational to think that a tiny minority of people would have this level of control. But when you say these things, it's blood libel. And the Jews have been subjected to that for centuries and centuries, for millenniums for that matter. And that's why I'm not a Jew, I'm a Christian. But I'm going to stand with the Jewish people, because if the world is ever successful in carrying out this chant of from the river to the sea, and they do annihilate the Jews, I hope my fellow Christians understand that we are next. Because the same people who hate Jews, they also hate Christians, because we too represent what the Jews represent, a sense of right and wrong, a spiritual accountability to the Creator God. And that's why I say that Christians cannot be silent in this. We cannot sit back and let even Christianity be defined by the people like Tucker Carlson, who I've never known, and I've known him a long time, but I've never known him to be that theological, that well-versed in the Bible or theology. And so he says things that I'm thinking, I'm not sure where he got that, but I'm pretty sure he didn't get it from divinity school.
Do you think that foreign countries are trying to campaign and to influence President Trump and President Trump's supporters against Israel?
I'm not sure that I can give you chapter and verse of who's doing maybe some efforts trying to convince President Trump. Here's what I would say. Look at what President Trump does and says, and I would say they're really not spending their money very wisely, because it doesn't seem to have influence on him. He's still saying the same things that he's been saying. He's been saying that Iran isn't going to get a nuclear weapon, that Hamas has to go and disarm. He's not changed anything that he said about that. He's been so consistent.
No, he's not changing, but who's trying to influence President Trump or
Yeah,
his
and I
supporters?
don't know that I have a list of that I could say, here's who it is, let's point him out. I don't want to be a Tucker Carlson on that. Tucker or Candace throw these wild accusations that here's who's behind it. They never provide the receipts. They never show any evidence or proof. It's just wild accusations. I don't want to do what I think we rightly accuse them of, and that's making stuff up out of whole
Hmm.
cloth.
But do you sense, the political field in the
Yeah.
U.S., the Republican Party pretty well, and Trump supporters? Do you feel that someone, let's not name them because you don't have the receipts, do you feel that some foreign countries or foreign entities with political agenda are trying to influence people around President Trump?
Oh, I would think that it's absolutely inevitable, because that's how the whole political process works. You're always trying to influence the people who are at the leverage point of power. Um, but that's true whether
But
it's,
this time it's against Israel.
yeah, there's no doubt about that. I think there are people who really don't like Israel. They don't like the Jews, and they're going to do everything they can to try to influence the U.S. government policy against Jews and against Israel. I don't have any doubt about that. I can't tell you that I know who it is or how much they're spending or where they're spending it and who's being influenced by it. I hope we find out. I'd love to have someone who has a real good grasp on forensic accounting to be able to chase it down and show us, where's the money coming from? Where is it going? How is it being used? There's no doubt in my mind that there's that this is not organic. Very few things in the political world are as organic as they make themselves to be. And I say that for somebody who has spent most of my adult life swimming in these waters. Um, when people pretend that, oh, it just happened organically, I'd say, yeah, probably didn't. There was an effort, there was a strategy, there was a plan, there were objectives lined out, and there was a tactical, detailed plan of how to get there. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But to say that it's just something that bubbled up is pretty ludicrous when you ask yourself, how does a person, in Tucker's case, in his 50s, suddenly, like a switch has been flipped, have a 180-degree turn of opinion on something as complicated as the Middle East and specifically Israel? How do you do that? It's one thing if an 18-year-old over the course of, let's say, his early adult life makes a big change in his ideological thought before he's 30, because maybe he gets his first real job and he pays taxes. And so he sees things differently and he makes changes. But it's pretty doggone rare for someone to get to their 50s, a well-educated person, an intellectually thoughtful person, who just suddenly wakes up one day and says, by golly, I think the Jews have done everything wrong in the world. I think everything that has happened, including the murder of Charlie Kirk, although Tucker hasn't said that, but Candace has, that somehow that it's connected to this tiny, tiny little minority of people, half of whom live in a tiny, tiny, tiny little sliver of land, 6,000 miles from Washington, D.C.
Yeah, by the way, he did talk about hummus in Jerusalem after Charlie Kirk was murdered. I want to talk about another event that got many headlines. Your meeting with Pollard, Jonathan Pollard. Can you tell me about that decision to do that? I know some US officials didn't like it. The White House backed you on this.
Yeah, it was really interesting because the New York Times, which I sometimes refer to as the New York Slimes, they reported a story that I'd had a secret meeting with Jonathan Pollard. Okay, first of all, there is no such thing as a secret meeting at the U.S. Embassy in Israel. It is physically impossible to have a secret meeting there. If I want to have a secret meeting with somewhere, the last place on God's earth I would go is the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Why? Because there are cameras everywhere. We know who's coming in. We look at their passport. We take the numbers down. We have pictures of everyone coming in. This idea that there was some secret meeting is laughable. And it is the kind of accusation that is made by a very uninformed or a very malicious person who would surely know that that's not true, but would say it anyway to get a headline out of it. I met with Jonathan Pollard simply because his attorney had requested that I have a meeting. And it turns out that the purpose of the meeting was not some request, because he made no request of me, none at all. Look, I will be the first to tell you that what Jonathan Pollard did when he sold information that he should have protected as a U.S. employee and he sold it to the Israelis was horrible. I don't defend a thing he did, not one thing. But he paid a pretty heavy price for it, 30 years in prison. And, he served his sentence. And when he got out, he wanted to come to Israel. He was able to do that, where he wanted to spend the rest of his life. I was in Israel. I think he was still in prison when I first met his wife in one of my many trips to Israel. I can't remember what year it was, several years ago. I was introduced to her, told this is Jonathan Pollard's wife. She said to me, I really hope my husband, when he gets out of prison, will be able to come to Israel. I was not in government. I couldn't say, yeah, I'll see what I can do, because there wasn't anything I could do. But we had a very pleasant conversation. Later, before I became ambassador, I was at an event. I think, if I recall right, it was at the Waldorf Hotel in Jerusalem. And Pollard was at the event. His wife was at the event. And this has been a few years ago, but after, obviously, he was out of prison and here. And he, she introduced me to him. I'd never met him before. Again, I didn't say, oh, you're wonderful, you did a great thing, because he didn't. His wife passed away, as you may know. And it turned out that what he wanted was to come and to thank me for being kind and gracious to his wife when I first met her while he was still in prison. That was the purpose of the meeting. Now, that may give people a lot of heartburn. Look, I meet with people all the time. Um, there was nothing secret about that. And if the New York Times, had thought about it, they would have known that it would be pretty stupid to think that we had some clandestine meeting or that it had some impact. And I think that's why when President Trump was asked about it and Carolyn Levitt was asked about it, they blew it off like, are you kidding? This is a nothing burger. So honestly, it's been more of a comic relief for me than it is like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm getting in trouble for this. Because the truth is it was nothing to be all alarmed about. And there are people who are still exercised about it. And I would just tell them, get a life, take a deep breath, have a decaffeinated cola, and get a good night's sleep.
We're running out of time. And it's fascinating. It's such a fascinating conversation. I do want to hear a word about sanctioning ICC because you had a message that you put out there.
Yeah, I think the U.S. position on the ICC has been very consistent and very clear. In fact, Secretary Rubio just issued sanctions on 2 additional judges at the ICC. The U.S. is not a part of it. We think it's a corrupt and hopelessly unfixable institution. We urge our allies to disengage themselves from the ICC. Most of them continue to be a part of it. We wish they wouldn't be. It is a political tool. It's especially egregious to us in the United States that the ICC thinks that it has jurisdiction over nations who don't even belong to it, who have never agreed to be under its tentacles of power. And for them to charge war crimes, not only against Israelis and elected Israeli officials, but against Americans, to make these outrageous accusations and claims and threaten that they will arrest people if they land in the wrong country. I think we find that just simply unacceptable. And we have pushed back over and over, and we'll continue to, because we feel it's an outrageous abuse of law. Very similar to what we've seen happen to President Trump, what the president believes has happened to Prime Minister Netanyahu. So it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that the U.S. position on the ICC and the ICJ is that these are corrupt organizations that pretend they have a reach that they simply do not legally have, and they wish to penalize people that they have no jurisdiction over. It would be like if in an American football game being played in Dallas, Texas, some referee in a soccer field in Dubai decided to throw a flag and penalize the Dallas Cowboys for a different game in a different location that had nothing to do because it was not even the same game. That's how we see the ICC. It's utterly corrupt and phony.
Do you think that we'll see President Assisi of Egypt at Mar-a-Lago while Prime Minister Netanyahu will visit Trump?
Yeah, I don't know if the president of Egypt will go to Mar-a-Lago. I do feel like that there will be at some point a meeting between the president of Egypt and the prime minister of Israel. It's in both of their advantage. I know that prime minister would really welcome that kind of meeting so that there can be greater levels of understanding and legitimate cooperation. There's no reason for Egypt and Israel to be at odds with each other. And so the more that those conversations can be held, I think everybody is going to be better off. As to whether it will happen in Mar-a-Lago, I couldn't venture a guess on that.
So last 2 questions, we saw that officials at the White House were not very pleased with Israel attacking a Hamas leader in the past week. Did you hear any backlash coming from Washington, D.C.?
I'm glad you brought that up because when you say we heard that the White House was upset, here's what we heard. We heard a reporter say that anonymous sources said that the White House was upset. My question would be, name your sources. If somebody believes that the White House was upset, then have the guts to stand up and say, we're upset. You didn't hear the president say that. You didn't hear his spokesperson say that. You didn't hear the Secretary of State or any high-level government official like the Secretary of War say
The
that.
president did say that they're looking into it.
Yeah, but
whether
here's the
it's
thing.
violation or
I have a
not.
real problem when people use these anonymous sources because I think it's cowardly and I think it's incredibly unfair to pretend that you have so knowledge of something that nobody else has knowledge of. To me, it's not much unlike Tucker Carlson saying everybody knows that Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad agent. This is like saying everybody knows the White House was upset about it. Let me tell you why I think it's a bunch of, I'll call it bovine droppings. That's the more polite way to say it. If there was really outrage on the part of the president, you know who would know that? His ambassador to Israel would know that. You know why? Because that's why I'm here. It's why he sent me here, to be his eyes and his ears. And if he was really upset, he would probably call the prime minister, but he would also call me. And he might even say, I want you to personally go to the prime minister's office and you deliver a message. I didn't get a call. And I would say that the reason I discount this story of being from the president, there may have been somebody in the White House. I don't know. Again, nobody told me. And the fact that they didn't tell me leads me to one of two conclusions. A, it never happened. Or B, if it happened, then those thoughts were being carried out in a way that is utterly amateurish, because you wouldn't have those you wouldn't say these kind of things to a reporter and not call the sitting ambassador to the country that you're supposed to be upset with. It simply makes no sense.
As the person who's the ears and eyes of President Trump in Israel, what's going to happen with President Trump's request to pardon Netanyahu? Is he going to push more? Is he going to try to do anything else? Because I know that he wrote the letter to the Israeli President Herzog, and then he told Prime Minister Netanyahu that he's not sure he has anything else that he can do. What do you predict? What do you hear about that?
I don't know. All I know is what the president said when he was here and spoke at the Knesset. And, I'm aware
Did you
that
get to talk to him about it?
I did not talk with him about it.
Oh, okay.
But I know his position on it. He's made that very clear. And, he certainly said that to President Herzog. President Herzog has, the letter from the prime minister. He's obviously, by his own statements, considering it, looking at it, making it very clear he will make the decision in what he thinks is best for the state of Israel. President Herzog has become a very close friend while I've been here. I have nothing but the highest of respect and admiration for him. He and his wife and my wife and I have developed a very cordial and close relationship. But even with that, I can't tell you what he's going to do because I don't know. And frankly, it's his decision to make, but I believe he's a man of impeccable integrity and that President Herzog will do what he thinks is best. I don't think, frankly, he will do it because of anybody's pressure, whether it's President Trump's or mine or the prime minister's. I think he will seriously and with great integrity weigh all of the situation before him. And I believe he will make a decision that he truly believes is best for the people of Israel.
So this is my very last question. Do you have any backstage story that we haven't heard about the hostage deal or President Trump's visit to Israel? And then, do you think that Israel is heading towards normalization with Saudi Arabia?
Now, you've packed a lot of questions in that one last question. So let me see if I can sort that out. It's sort of like unpacking a bowl of spaghetti and trying to lay it all straight. But here's what I think I can say to you is that, first of all, the hostages getting out was one of the greatest days of my life. Watching them reunite with their families. I happened to be sitting at Ben Gurion Airport at that particular moment, waiting for the president to land on Air Force One for his historic speech to the Knesset. Watching that unfold, the only thing I can compare it to is watching Neil Armstrong put his foot on the moon in July of 1969. I watched that when I was a teenager, and it was just an amazing thing to see. And in that same way, one of those where were you when this happened moments, seeing the hostages reunited. Keep in mind, I'd visited with probably every single hostage family over the course since I've arrived as ambassador. I met with hostage families and former hostages every single week, sometimes several times a week. So many of them, I knew them. I knew their families. And to see them come home, and I wondered at times, will they ever get to come home? Will Hamas ever let them go? Because Hamas is the reason they were there, and Hamas was the reason that they were kept there for so very long in such miserable conditions. And that was a surreal thing for me to see that and to realize that, frankly, it would not have happened without President Trump and his being able to marshal every single Arab nation to sign the peace agreement, to commit to be a part of his 20-point peace plan, to see them come to Sharm el-Sheikh and sign it. I don't think people really understand what a big deal that was. And I can't think of any president, certainly in my lifetime, I don't know if ever, could have pulled that off. And the fact that he did, I just want to give the credit to him. Nobody else deserves the credit for that. And then to say, what about the future of the Abraham Accords? I think we will see other nations join the Abraham Accords, and I hope in 2026 we will see several. I think we could see Syria and Lebanon be among the first Abraham Accord members to show up next. I feel like that Saudi Arabia would like to be part of normalization with Israel. They've got challenges within their own population, but there's no doubt in my mind that they know that normalization is better for them and better for the Israelis, and they'll figure out a way to do it. I think they will. Can't promise anything. I'm just an ambassador. I'm not a prophet, so I won't make a prediction. But I think it's important to end on a very hopeful and optimistic note. I think we are in the beginnings of a complete realignment of the Middle East, a new level of opportunity to see a peace and a security that the people of Israel deserve, and frankly, the people of the world deserve.
Ambassador Huckabee, thank you so much for joining the Krause Report. And I also want to thank Dambo that joined us today.
Thank you. Great to be with you, and I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining the Krause Report. If you liked this episode, don't forget to click subscribe and join us.